a show that tackles the big issues affecting the BVI and the rest of the Caribbean. Searches for answers to today's big questions and gives viewers a unique perspective on developing stories. Follow the big story with me, Kathy Richards, only on JTV. This show is brought to you by the National Bank of the Virgin Islands, Cyril B. Romney Turtola Pier Park, NV Salon, Nail Spa and Barbershop, Tisley Cross Deliciously Smooth Cider, and Digicel, simply more speed, reliability and entertainment.
Plug into Digicel Plus and get even more entertainment with Disney Plus included. The best of Disney, Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, and National Geographic all in one place. Whenever you want, plug into Plus to enjoy Disney Plus and much more with a home fiber bundle. Sign up today. Digicel Plus.
This is The Big Story. I'm Kathy Richards. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition we have in studio. No stranger to the set, of course, Mrs. Shayna Smith Archer. Welcome again. It's a pleasure.
Hi, Kathy. Thanks for having me back.
Awesome. We're here to talk about basically your district, where you reside. District 1. We know as of the end of April what, the situation that you guys were trusted into, and trying to find someone to hear truly of how you feel, what you're doing. Thought it best to speak with you. Always a very candid person, and I'm trusting that you're very, very candid in this instance.
Well, I think everybody, kind of emotionally, mentally, physically, it was really traumatizing, I think, for the entire country. And as you would have been aware, in June of this year, soon after the event happened, that we had a community mingle, basically just to bring the community together for some fun. We had games, we had district trivia, we had Dr. Albert Tompkins come and talk about, the importance of your mental health during that time, and it went over very well. So subsequent to that, one of the things that we want to do now was to formalize the community group that, kind of came together to put on the event. And we had a follow-up meeting on Thursday, last Thursday, week before Thursday, to again start to put things in place. And of course, persons are going to come up now and bring up the topic of, what's happening is in regards to active representation
in the legislative body,
in the community, because a district representative, I think we've taken them for granted somewhat. It's like you just always had them. So if there's a scenario where you don't, what happens? Who do you turn to? Where do you go? Because for some people, that's their kind of guiding post, as it were, and they're very close-knit relationships. In the 4th district, we've always been a close-knit community. So, it's like kind of like one big family. So that question came up, and we actually made a request, a second request, I would say, to have the Premier and his caucus come and have a community meeting and, explain to us where we are, what's to happen. We heard, certain things being said in press conferences as whether or not you can have a point person to, in terms of an elected capacity, and we know that that's not the case. So that, kind of went by the wayside. So the question now is that, we know that seats are vacated per the Constitution either by death, resignation, or absences from 3 sittings of the House, right? So the current session. So we're currently at that 3rd sitting since April. And, we're waiting to see now what comes down. According to the Election Act, within 60 days of a vacancy, by-election should be called, essentially by the governor. And notwithstanding if there is...
Should be or can be called?
It would be called, we put it like that, because that's what's required. So where the exception plays in is that if there is a national election within 4 months.
Yes, it can hold
Yes,
until that
that's when it
period.
will be able. Because again, that's just 90 days out. Just over 90 days out it would be. So that's what's standing in the law as it is right now.
And
Right?
from your recollection, I'm trying to stretch my imagination to see my memory to see if I can recall, but it's not coming. What's the average duration of a sit-in?
Well, I don't know if we have a clear average, because I know, sometimes
I'm just watching the pattern.
sit-ins does take, sometimes sit-ins might take a week, so it might be 2 days within that week. In the case of the last one, actually, it was probably closer to 2 months. But, we have to take into fact that there was the holidays for the August. So there would have been a break there where, there wouldn't have been a normal resumption. And then the other challenge you have now is that because of, this is post-COI, and all of these new legislations or amendments
and regulations put
and
into place.
legislation that were read from COI report release. So like say for example the liquor license and the police act.
Now coming to the
Those
table.
are now coming back for the second and third reading. So it's like you have a backlog on top of the increase in volume now that's coming down the pipeline. So they will be, it did cause an extension in that regard, but hopefully we're able to get through this, because I think one of the things that concerned me, just as a citizen and a resident of the 1st district, again, looking at, what is the role and the purpose of a district candidate? And yes, persons would say you have territorial representatives, but we're going to get into that because you told me we're going to talk all things politics today. So, again, that person, that's kind of like the point person, and not having one, I think, it's unconstitutional, to put it point blank, because you're guaranteed representation through the Constitution, through a process of election, and all of these things are laid out, right? So unless someone can give us a very good reason as to why we shouldn't have the opportunity to select a representative, the legislation should stand as is, and we move forward to get that back in place and move forward. Because, I have a theory playing with right now, Kathy, as it relates to the general election, and the implementation framework clearly states, right, and this is what the government has already agreed to, that you cannot call an all election. That's one. So that is off the table as far as saying, okay, let's call an all election so that, you can have the representation and fulfill the requirement of constitutional due elections at the same time. So that's not on the table. So as a result of that, now you're looking at me. In looking at the framework,
Cannot call, so there are two things. Early elections as opposed to by-election. There is a distinction between the two.
Yeah. So the by-election would just be for where the vacancy is.
Yes.
Right? And only general elections. So we're going to use the word general so everybody understands. That would be territory-wide. So that being the case now, that's May 2023, right? Based on when the last general election was called. So if we have now, when we look at where we are with the implementation framework timeline, June 30th, 2023 is when the Constitutional Review Commission report is due, right? Because of the late start, I anticipate that there may be an extension on that, but we'll see. But my thinking though is that if the concern was so raised that, the second priority after suspension of the Constitution, when we look at the recommendations, was the constitutional review and the importance of essentially correcting some of the systemic issues that are in there. Whether it's to add new clauses to the Constitution to deal with things like the statutory boards, commission, and whether the speaker should be an elected representative, and a host of other things. Whether or I should say not whether, but the situation of elected members doing business with government, right? So those are some of the key elements of things that are there. And my mind is that the UK is going to want to have us on a very short leash. So therefore, the constitutional review is paramount, so to speak. And typically, it can happen outside of this in terms of amendments to the Constitution, as it were. happening outside of a general election. But what has happened in the past, the recent past, as in terms of the 2007, is that the amendments were made in 2006, going into 2007, but it was after the general election in 2007 when they took effect.
Okay.
Right? So again, in my mind, the UK agenda is that they want these reforms done before the next general election. Based on the timeline when the report is due, that's not lining up right now.
But the thing is, I recall, I think it was during a press conference with either the governor himself or with both himself and the premier, when a similar question was put to him, and it was said that, well, even if you should have the election at the constitutionally due time, whichever government comes into power would be expected to continue the implementation of those regulations, if my memory serves me right.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I don't see that, it's such a tough thing whether we should be worried if they're going to allow a general election to happen in the constitutional due period, which is at least by May 26th of 2023.
So in an ideal world, yes, Kathy. That's what I will tell you. But if we look at what has happened here over the last 12 months, there have been a lot of new precedents that have been set. So therefore, I am not taking anything off the table.
Okay.
So
well, it is
no, and it's for us to continually, especially as a community, to monitor what's happening
in a monitoring mode.
How things are progressing with the implementation in terms of a schedule being set, are these dates being met, and if not, what are the contingencies that are being put in place to make sure that we get them done. And again, what the governor's response is, because essentially he is the one that reports back to the UK to say, well, yes, they're on task. No, they're not. They're frustrating the process, and essentially can at any morning get up and suspend the constitution, because that amendment has already gone through the process in their parliament. So it is just a matter of gazetting it.
We're a little away from District 1, but yeah, we'll get back to District 1. On that point that you just raised, that the UK could just wake up one morning and decide to, listen, we're suspending. I listened carefully at the meeting that was held just over the weekend at Anegada, where Honorable Kai Reimer sought to dispel that notion that the UK could just wake up one morning and decide. For him, based on what he had said and probably from his understanding, is that it has to go through a process. They would not, because of what is going on in terms of them implementing doing the necessary regulations, putting the regulations in place as recommended in the COI report. It's not likely to happen where one morning you wake up and hear the Constitution of the Virgin. It has to go through a process of discussions, back and forth. You have to be able to say, because the whole back of that recommendation hinges greatly on the implementation of the recommendation, and owing to the fact that those recommendations are progressively being done, it is not, the world would not open up to see someone just wake up one morning and say, look, we're done with you.
Okay, so let me make it clear then. Not that the governor would do that on a whim, but it isn't something that has to come for a vote, whether to the people, the House of the Assembly, or the Cabinet. It is one man's decision, essentially, is what it boils down to. So yes, I agree with the Honorable. There would have to be a lead up to it, but it is still one man's decision. And this is one of the other things when you look at the entire context, okay? Because it's like we started off on a district, but when we back out the picture to the national level, it goes back, and it ties into, again, the report that came out earlier this year about self-governance, the assessment that was done by Dr. Carlisle Corbin, that said we are basically in a situation of unilateralism, which means what? One person making all the decisions. So even though the elected government has some responsibilities that have been devolved to them, so that means those have been given to you and you are the final decision maker. There are a lot of things that have been delegated, which is where persons, when you hear us talk about the reserved powers of the governor, is that they have delegated certain decisions. It means that they can take it back. So in our journey to self-governance, it means that just that, we're gonna be devolving the decision-making powers to you to start to decide for yourself what, how you govern your country, good, bad, indifferent. And that is not the case. So what they were saying is that there's a lot of work that needs to happen in terms of really moving towards whether it's bilateral, meaning yes, we have to come together and make a decision. But if it is not a bilateral decision making situation, it means again it is one man's decision. You understand? So again, things around national security, before this current constitutional order put in place a National Security Council, all the decisions around national security were one man's decision. Right? And I'm going to open it up. One person, because we might get a female governor one of these days. Like Bermuda.
Yes, one person.
But yeah, one person's decision is essentially where it comes down to. And again, these are some of the things with the current constitutional review that as a community we have to start to think about. In order for you to have checks and balances, you do need to have, either two or more people as part of the decision-making process.
And coming right back directly to District 1, I know if things did not go in that direction that it has, one of the things that would have certainly been happening is constant dialogues and meetings around this situation with your elected official, and to a greater extent along with other at-large
stakeholders,
yes, and at-large representatives. What system is in place right now, if any at all, to allow you that environment? And I would go back to say that I remember at the formation of the Government of National Unity, I think it was Honorable Carvin Malone was committed to being that face as a representative for District 1. Talk to me about those instances and what's happening.
Well, that was the only thing that we heard. So it was never fleshed out in terms of coming back and saying, again, is this person to be seen as, kind of like a caretaker, or, this is who you go to with your concerns and issues. Because again, the seat wasn't vacated, isn't vacated.
It isn't.
Right? So again, even the talk of appointing somebody as a representative is incorrect.
So maybe not the word representative, but to keep the community in check, have them have a voice to somebody who is within the legislative body active at the moment.
So again, we hadn't heard anything subsequent to that, and we hadn't heard it announced after that either. So again, this is where it's important for the requests that we made in terms of having a community meeting so that we can have that one-on-one dialogue with our government as to what our situation is. Because even with even if there was a meeting initially with the territorial candidates, because again, they're at large, that would have been helpful, I think. But it's unfortunate where we find ourselves, but I think it would be unfair to ask the district to go without representation until next year in May, because then that will be 12 months without a representative.
I could only imagine the state of affairs already. It's how many months now? It's 4 or 5 months.
4 and into 5.
5 months, and
Yeah. So it's kind of like, things are in limbo. So it's through other district meetings. So again, when the meetings came for the COI implementation recommendations, and we asked questions then too about it, and that's where it was said that yes, we would have a separate meeting, but to date it hadn't been scheduled. And then now in this second meeting that we, the community, held, so this wasn't a government led meeting, this was the community saying, hey, let's come together and look about what it is we need to get done and what we can control. Because again, sometimes it's, you know, we get caught up in trying to control things we can't. So as a community, let's look at the things. So, you know, some of the ideas that came out, we're talking about beautification, having a Christmas party and a sing out for Christmas, and some other things that we want to address, like youth unemployment. So, you know, we're not short of ideas. The thing is that, you know, at some points we have to interface with the government services, and that too is where representatives come in. So, you know, I was telling you pre-show, one of the ideas that has been tossed around for many years is the importance, or I should say the idea of a district council. And in the current scenario, I'm seeing how important
that is
something like that would be, because again, for whatever reason, if you have an absent district representative, your district council now basically can take up that slack. So they're already in place, they're already doing certain things within the community. But here is now where, again, you know, everything can continue without missing a beat. You know, the people have that interface, so they would interface with the government on behalf of the community, and the community can interface with them.
That is a suggestion I recall clearly that came up during the campaign period of 2015 by the residents of Virgin Gorda, who at the time also felt that, you know, they're not getting sufficient representation because of a number of factors. The main one being that, you know, it's Virgin Gorda and Anegada, and then we had a similar situation with District 2, where it's Just Van Dyke and some parts of the western end of the territory. So, but it came up again during the 2019 campaign period, but we never see anything moving forward to even, you know, bring that together. And they say it's going to wait until RDS children this field. You have a unique situation that you're now plunged into. Had you gone in that direction to try to establish that, you would have been able to see the weaknesses, the strengths, and way to develop that. And look, District 1 would have had some good representation.
And again, you know, the importance too of having that voice in the House of Assembly. You know, it's like representatives, they say it all the time, they're not there on their own strength. A district sent them. So if we have issues, and the other day I sat down and I came up with a long list of some things that need to be addressed, and I'm like,
for District 1.
For just District 1. You know, and again, every district will have their list. A lot of it will be in common, and then there will be those, you know, idiosyncrasies that everybody experiences. But going back now to the territorial candidates and their role and purpose in the whole system, you know, amendment to the resolution was brought forward by one of the members, a territorial member, speaking to that same thing about the representation or the quality of representation for the sister islands, and whether or not we should think about basically creating districts for them. So Virgin Gorda would be made as a night district, Anegada would have a seat, basically a district seat, and Just Van Dyke would have a district seat. So that's where he took away the 2 at-large elected, and basically they would become districts, and then you would have two remaining at-large elected seats that would be now, say, this is for the premiership and their deputy. You know, and all of these are questions that I think are important for us to discuss, because within the current remit of the commission, the Constitutional Review Commission, one of the things is about, you know, how do we create checks and balances? You know, do we need to separate the executive branch out of the legislative branch? Similar to what we see, let's say, for example, in the USVI, where you elect a governor and a lieutenant governor. They basically appoint a cabinet. So the appointees of cabinet are not elected representatives. Those persons sit as your legislative branch. These are the people now that make laws that basically and check the balance of power in the executive in terms of policies. So your governor brings a budget, and the legislative branch now can basically shred it and send it back, or, you know, they agree with it, they make amendments, it goes forward. So all of this is part and parcel of what it is. So we have the Westminster system because that's, you know, we're a UK colony, so therefore that's the system that we've adopted. But yeah, so it's to have those conversations now as to whether this is what's needed to truly balance and check the power of an executive. Because if the executive sits in the legislative, commands the backbench because they're not independents, then anything that they bring forward will go. You know, so the only place now that there is any check and balance of power in the current system is if the governor decides not to assent to a law.
Okay, and there are a couple of other areas, and like you would have alluded to the proposal that Honorable Malone has put together for possible discussions. Rather than reducing the number of at-large seats, add 2 more ministers and make it more, because the concern is, as you see it, Minister for Education, Culture, Youth Affairs and Sports, Premier, Minister of Finance, responsible for tourism, responsible for agriculture and fisheries, works, utility.
Yeah.
Seems to be too heavy.
It's too much.
And as a result, things are falling by the way, because you as a one individual cannot give it a, yes, we understand you have permanent secretaries and the departments that work along, but falling under one person, so many heads, could be shedded a little bit.
Yeah, and this is where, you know, in doing some research and looking at different things as it relates to, you know, how we do need to think about restructuring our government. Because I think we do need to expand the cabinet in terms of having more ministers.
Bring them junior ministers into the cabinet too.
But, well, in other jurisdictions, what I found, they call them parliamentary secretaries. So let's say now your backbenchers, you would have like a parliamentary secretary for labor, maybe a parliamentary secretary for agriculture and food security. And they actually have a well-defined role in terms of what they're supposed to do and work alongside the minister and the ministry in terms of executing policy. That's their role as legislators.
And I think that would work beautifully.
But I agree with you. Definitely we need to expand the cabinet in terms of additional ministers. And it's not that it's going to make the service bigger. It's actually going to start to kind of streamline things, because you're going to pull out certain portfolios and create its own entity, as it were. But it already exists, but it's, you know, compiled into one big thing that's probably a lot less manageable, you know, because everything can be a priority, and that's the thing what we have to understand. And having worked in the public service, I know that all too well. So, you know, there's always going to be that competition, but at the end of the day, we have to look at, you know, what are the priorities for the people, and improving quality of life. Because for me, that always has to be the paramount thing. Is what you're doing improving the quality of life of the people? If not, stop it.
So the clock is coming down on us in this edition, but I wanted you to, as a voice of reason, one of being very candid and with a heart for the community in which you live, the district in which you live. Yes, we know there are a lot of people in the district who would love to have their voices heard, but they don't like these type of platforms. You are very open to doing so. Say to this government of national unity in this moment, considering the situation that you're facing, considering the long list that you spoke of you're having, what it is that you would want to see them do almost immediately.
Well, as it stands now, Kathy, we have a meeting set for the 6th of October, so this Thursday, West End Community Center at 7 p.m. And again, we want to say thank you to the Premier and his team for accepting our invitation to come and speak to the community. So that's the first thing. And we do look forward to the start of an ongoing dialogue, you know, around how we improve our situation there. And again, kind of set a precedent for the future, that if any other district finds themselves in these situations, that we do take the necessary decisions to put measures in place. Because it is something that, again, we have to think about people, you know, regardless of what happened or who did what, you know, we're dealing with people. And, you know, you have to put them first and say, you know, what is important here to bring this community, to make them whole again, as it were.
Awesome.
You know, and that for me is kind of like, you know, what we want to hear in terms of what his heart is towards the community, what he intends to do and bring forward to help us to do that. And again, I always say, the country is no stronger than its districts, and you are only as strong as your weakest link. So therefore, if one is hurting, all of us are hurting, and that's what we want to see and hear and feel from our representatives come Thursday, and from there again have that ongoing conversation. So it should be the first of many more meetings in terms of getting us to restoring, you know, our community and get us back where we need to be.
And like you said, you know, one weak link or one is hurting, the entire bunch feels it. So we'll make sure that we are on ground to share with the rest of the territory, you know, what goes on at that meeting, and so we reach out. Shayna, always a voice of reason. Thank you so much for taking the time out, and thank you for joining us for this edition of The Big Story. I'm Kathy Richards.